Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another episode of Peaceful Mind. Today, we're talking about common mental health conditions in the Muslim community. I'm Mariam Salie, and with me, I have my co host.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Munira Hoosain.
And today, our guest is clinical psychologist Saabierah Towfie. Assalamu alaikum, Saabierah, and welcome.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me.
Salam.
Shukran for joining us. I know that your schedule is very busy, so we do appreciate you making the time. And maybe before we start, you can just share something about yourself.
Um, okay, so I think as obviously you've introduced me, Saabierah Towfie, clinical psychologist, currently working in private practice. But I've worked at a lot of the government institution hospitals, such as Lentegee Hospital, Stickland Hospital. So I've been around. Uh, Hopefully learned quite a few things, and hopefully I can share as well with everyone listening today.
I'm sure you will. So, Sabra, when I've spoken to many of my colleagues about the research that I do, and Sabra and I are in a peer supervision group as well. So, we're often talking about, working with clients in the Muslim community and sometimes the kind of challenges that we experience. When it comes to the Muslim community, one of the things that they think when it comes to mental health is that mental health conditions are very far removed from like an everyday experience. They see it as something that is out there, and don't always realize how common it is to experience some
Yeah.
of these conditions. Maybe you can just start at that point and just tell us about when we say also common mental health conditions. What are we referring to?
Mm. Look, I think that's a very good point. I think, from my personal experience in working in private practice, I often find that there's a lot of, Muslim people who want to see a Muslim psychologist just so that there's, I guess, an understanding of our religion as well, and the culture that forms part of our understanding of mental health. And I hope that it's partly kind of, removing some of the shame sometimes we feel. I think for many of us, we are brought up, believing that mental health is such a bad sign in terms of if we're not managing it well. Um,
It's a
and
failure.
that
Yeah.
it's a failure, it's weak iman. Just and even accessing resources and getting support almost feels like something we shouldn't be able to do. Just get on your musla and make your raka'at, do your 5 salahs. And often then there's such a shame-based feeling or shame that comes up because now I'm doing all of these things and still the feeling is not lifting. And I often find that the kind of damage it does just in essentially with our relationship with our creator um, is actually quite unfortunately common because then we feel like, what, does Allah not love me?
Mm.
So I'm making my salah, I fast when I'm supposed to, I'm giving to charity, but why am I struggling with this? Um, and I think, something that we always need to keep in mind just is that mental wellness and mental illness is not something necessarily to feel ashamed about. If it was, then our Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would not have had depression himself, and we would not have been gifted with Surah Ad-Dua had that not happened. And if the most perfect creation or being ever created had depression, for example, then how can we be weak or bad or evil for experiencing the same thing? And I think life is tough. And to just kind of say that we're just supposed to roll with the punches, you're just supposed to get up and move on and not acknowledge um, that the support is there and that the support is there also through Allah's will. Any information that a psychologist has, that a doctor has, is there because Allah has given us that knowledge. And
That's
so,
very true.
in actual fact, accessing support from a psychologist is the same as accessing a doctor for an antibiotic when you have the flu. It is actually through Allah that those kind of things are working. So it's actually also a form of worship. Um, and and I think a lot of things, unfortunately, are really
Saabierah, wait. Are you saying that going for therapy is a form of ibadah? Is that what you said now?
yes.
I love it.
It's such a different perspective. It's a nice way of looking at it, and I think it will maybe hopefully make people feel like it's okay to do that because you're taking care of yourself.
Yes, and you're protecting your relationship with your creator,
Mm.
with the resources that our creator has given to us.
Yeah.
And so it can't be wrong. It can't be a sign of weak iman. It can't be a bad thing. Um, and I mean, if we look at just some of the, as I'm saying, life is tough. If we're looking at some of the common mental illnesses or, mental struggles that people have, things like depression. I mean, life is hard. Who doesn't have losses? Who doesn't experience grief or difficulties on any kind of, sphere of our functioning? If we're looking at anxiety, just trying to keep up, even with just the aspects of social media and the social comparisons that come up, everyone is posting about the perfect life.
Yeah.
And here I am with my hidden struggles, thinking that it's only me.
Yeah.
So there's and trauma. We live in South Africa. Like I was gonna say, unfortunately, there is a lot of trauma. And so when it comes to, for example, carjackings or motor vehicle accidents or those kind of things, unfortunately, it is part of the picture of what we are forced to survive. And
Mm.
so these things
Yes.
we don't have a choice with. And so for me, in my practice, a lot of what I see is depression, anxiety, trauma work, helping people process what they have been through, what they have survived, the emotions, and validating what comes with that. And sometimes helping people learn to cope differently. So if you look at substances, for example, which is rife just worldwide, internationally as well. Coping with trauma, coping with anxiety, coping with depression. Sometimes people will engage in unhealthy coping mechanisms, not as a means of trying to mess things up, but just because they are struggling to cope.
Mm.
So helping people navigate that. Um,
Yeah.
I sound very cliche, but it is a privilege being able to hold this space like that.
Saabierah, you mentioned substance use. Is that something that you see very often in our community?
I do. I've worked at some inpatient rehabilitations and outpatient rehabilitations as well. It is common. Um, and I think, there is an aspect of, some people will experiment, developmentally. Sometimes people will experiment, but there is a point where it does become problematic. But I've never in my life sat with someone who is trying to enter recovery from substances who's doing it just because. Usually there is a trauma um, somewhere underneath, and the person is trying to medicate the pain because they don't know any other way. And so, yeah.
Sure. I'm getting goosebumps because, I think it's so important to share these perspectives because I think when you don't work in this area and if you're not exposed to all of this, then we don't know that, how common it is or how frequently it happens. And like you said, because you are working with people in a particular way, you get to see deeper, you get to see underneath the surface. And so you get to experience, what is at the root of all of this. And I think it's so important for people to understand that. Besides the fact that we sometimes think that these things don't happen in the Muslim community,
Yeah.
but so many of the experiences that we see, in our clients, it's in the Muslim community as well. And it's so important for us to talk about it and I think if we understand it from this perspective, that the person is actually struggling and they're trying to survive or they're trying to cope and like this, they're trying to medicate the pain. I think we will just naturally you are more empathic towards that person. You'll respond differently.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't address the problem until you acknowledge the problem.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
First, you have to
Yeah.
first
So
recognize.
we keep it a secret.
Mm.
Yes.
And, addiction, for example, breeds in secrecy. And so once we kind of, are able to talk about what happens, understand it from a different perspective, remove the shame, it does help not just the person who is using and wants to enter recovery, but the family as well, because they hold the fort also.
Mm.
And it won't happen to anyone. I think that's just something that's quite important. There's no immunity um, from these kind of difficulties. And if it does enter our lives, that it isn't anything on us, because it can happen to anyone, even if it is, from the outside, the most perfect family, the most perfect person. Um, Mental health and mental, I'm gonna say difficulties, or, sometimes illness can be quite a strong word,
Mm.
um, can affect anyone. And I almost want to say that at some point, all of us are going to face some kind of difficulty.
Mm.
It's almost inevitable.
Mm.
If we think of grief,
Mm.
we are going to lose someone important to us somewhere along the line. If we think of, studying, chances are, somewhere along the line, even if you didn't fail a test, you're not going to do as well on a certain test that you as like you wanted to. And so also just normalizing that it does happen, and it's not a bad sign. But learning how to navigate through it is actually very important.
Saabierah, what about suicide? Suicide is one of those taboo topics that we
Mm,
don't like talking about as Muslims.
mm,
Is that
mm.
something you encounter in your practice, whether it's suicidal thoughts or attempts?
Yes. So
Yeah.
quite often, I think when, especially with depression, right? So part of the clinical picture of depression is suicidal ideation. And with that comes something that we call anhedonia, but it means a loss in previously pleasurable activities. So if you think of someone whose mood is so low, or like they're so irritable, right? They can't, it's like struggling to hold this feeling together, and there's no pleasure, there's no joy, then often the thought will come up, around like, and it's not, and I almost want to say, in my experience, it's more about just feeling so hopeless and worthless that we're needing to end the pain. And we're not really sure how much we can carry it. And often there's so much guilt that I'm not doing well or not being well, that the thought is, okay, like, if I'm going to be a burden to my family. And that thought can be so consuming. And so it does happen. And it does happen quite often with trauma, actually with all of the things that we were talking about, with depression, with anxiety, with trauma, with substances. Um, when someone gets pushed to the very like brink,
Mm. Mm.
um, sometimes it feels like that's the way to cope. Mostly I've seen ideation. Alhamdulillah, we haven't lost anyone, but I've also seen people who have attempted,
Mm.
um, and just trying to hold and navigate the space of sometimes the guilt of what was done,
Mm.
the disbelief, sometimes of, oh my gosh, did it really get to that point? The
Mm.
shame and not having to face family,
Mm. Mm.
and the regret often around what had happened. So it's very common.
You made me think now about someone that I had spoken to where there was an attempt, um, and she spoke about the kind of response she got from the family, that
Mm,
they saw her attempt as, just looking for attention,
mm,
that, and not
mm.
understanding. And like you
Yeah.
said, and I mean, I've had this experience myself with clients where
Mm,
it's just so overwhelming
yeah.
that that seems like an option to just, like I say, in the pain, that I
Yes.
don't have to carry this. And I remember thinking, because we've had a few suicides in the community,
Mm,
in recent years. And I
mm,
remember thinking, especially it was when it was a young boy, and I thought to myself,
mm,
have we failed our community that
mm,
someone would think that that is the only option, that
mm,
there isn't any kind of support or help?
mm,
How do we let people know that,
mm,
there is help, there is support, and that they don't have to go through
mm,
those experiences alone, that there are people out there who are willing to help? Is this
yeah.
something that you have experienced as well?
In terms of letting people know that there are resources.
Yeah, with clients, it was particularly clients from the Muslim community.
Mm. I think again, because of sometimes the shame that's attached to our struggles, and that for many of us, it's you're just supposed to chin up and
Yeah.
push through. That the
That's
fear of accessing support almost feels like a weakness. And I really do wish that more people would be able to access support, because the support is there, and even anonymously, right? So, even if you call Lifeline, for example, you could do it telephonically, you could do it anonymously, but just knowing that the support is there. But I think before someone can even feel comfortable with accessing the support, it's about knowing that you are not being punished because you are facing a difficulty, and that you are not unloved because we are facing a difficulty, and that these thoughts are common when there is a struggle. Any person struggling with some of the severe trauma, for example, that people often face, would be having those thoughts. But it's holding that thought alone, holding that pain alone, then becomes overwhelming.
It's part of the disease. I think that was very helpful for me when you said that, that these suicidal thoughts are actually, one of the documented symptoms of
Yes.
depression. So if you have
Yes.
depression, this comes along with it. It's part of the
Yes.
disease. When I was growing up, we had a family member, a auntie, who used to be admitted to Falkenberg frequently, and this is all this thing about the moments and this
Yeah.
person being out of touch with reality. And
Mm.
then, of course, when I studied, I realized, well, this is actually schizophrenia that we're talking about,
Yeah.
and it's actually not one of the common mental
Mhm.
disorders, if I'm not mistaken. Right? It's not that
No.
common. There are a lot of other mental health issues that are a lot
Yes.
common than schizophrenia.
Mhm.
Is that your
Yes.
experience as well?
Yes.
And that's still the first thing that we jump to when we think mental health.
Yes.
Often we think schizophrenia.
Or split
Yes.
personality. That's a common one. This is something
Who's out of touch with
Well,
reality.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
No, bipolar gets thrown around so often, almost quite informally, just because someone is a little bit moody, or, feeling one mood different now and then differently later. So there are these kind of uh, terms or illness names that we might throw around, but it's not that common. So things like schizophrenia, which has a genetic basis or predisposition generally, even that only like generally shows up within a certain timeline. For example, with schizophrenia, with men, it's between 18 to 25, I think, then it might emerge. With females, 25 to 30. So females generally display it a bit later, but it's not very common. And generally, there will be a family history, and very rarely, substances might trigger a genetic predisposition. But again, that's very rare. Bipolar is not very common as well. Um, and I know, like, split personalities and those kind of things on TV, it's very, fascinating. Um, but it's not very common. That is almost like probably like the most rare, um, uh, yeah,
Which makes
disorder that
a,
exists.
a good point about TU, because I think that a lot of the information that people have gathered over the years around mental health is from media, and it's not always an accurate representation of what these
No.
conditions actually are. And I'm just thinking now, like we're talking about these things and you're talking about the ones that are uncommon, but even something like depression and anxiety, I think when we use the term depression, people have an idea or perception about it. So can we break it down and just in simple terms, when you talk about depression, what is it?
So depression essentially is a mood disorder, right? And it can be caused by various things, but it's symptomology in terms of what a doctor or a psychiatrist or psychologist will be looking for is either a low or irritable mood for longer than 2 weeks, relatively unchanged. For example, over that 2 weeks, as I said, anhedonia, which is the loss in pleasurable activity. So things that would kind of pick you up suddenly just don't do the
Hobbies.
same things. Yes, all those hobbies fall to the sideline. If you like doing your hair, it's suddenly like, we couldn't care less. There's also aspects of insomnia. So either struggling to sleep or sleeping too much. There would also then be appetite changes. So someone just won't eat at all. They'll lose their appetite, or they'll eat too much, comfort eat, and essentially gain weight. There's also aspects of distractibility or difficulties concentrating, feelings of hopelessness and worthlessness, and suicidal ideation, which, as I've said, is actually part of the clinical picture of depression. So those are the main ones, unless I've forgotten anything, Mariam.
Those are the main ones, and anxiety also. Maybe just talk about because those are sort of two of the most common ones, and
Mm.
sometimes they appear together, and sometimes they appear
Yes.
separately, and sometimes aspects of one with the other. It's the
Yeah.
two that you kind of see all the time. So I mean, you
I
think
was
about
wondering,
depression.
yeah,
Mhm.
I was going to say they're best friends.
They are. They're like best friends. They're always
Um,
coming together.
they're always like, yeah, I almost want to say, in my experience, that they come together, right? The levels that they come at might be
Mm.
different, right? So there might be a good mood presentation. So someone might be sad more than anxious, but feeling anxious is going to be there. Or they'll be so anxious that it's affecting their mood also. So these are almost like the Siamese twins
Yeah.
in terms of mental difficulties. Um, but I think, with anxiety, obviously, we're talking about an anxious feeling, feeling hypervigilant, feeling on edge, not being able to rest, worrying about everything all the time.
Hypervigilant. Can you explain hypervigilance for us?
So hypervigilant is almost like a little bit of a trauma response, but you're always on guard, right? Never being able to rest or relax. And if you take someone who's been robbed, for example, right? Every time they leave the house, they need to like double check: is my pepper spray here? Have I locked the house? Is there like who's walking down the road? Or if someone is quite anxious about an exam, it would be like, I need to wake up 2 o'clock in the morning now because I need to study. There's this other chapter that I need to do. But essentially, it's always on guard.
Mm.
Always worrying, always trying to be prepared. Um, and I do want to say that I think sometimes it's a little bit difficult because our understanding of our emotions can sometimes be not as helpful when we frame certain feelings as bad
Yeah.
and others as good. So if I'm feeling sad, then I'm depro, and I'm depressed. So
Yeah.
this must be like a bad thing. But essentially, the spectrum of human life means that you feel all your feelings.
Yeah.
And so feeling a little bit anxious is not always a bad thing.
Mm.
So I think it's also important for us to keep in mind to not always pathologize our feelings, because our feelings are there to help us. It's
Mm.
communicating something. So if you're a little bit worried, a little bit anxious, it can keep you on your toes. I really wanted to pass my driver's exam. Yeah. So I made sure I went for all my lessons. If I don't want to be knocked over by a car when I cross the road, a little bit of worry, a little bit of anxiety is going to make sure I check all sides before I cross the road. But when it reaches a point where it means that I can't function,
Thank you
that's
for
where
adding
the
that.
problem
Yeah,
is.
I was also wanting to add that with depression and anxiety, that sometimes the feelings are there, but it only becomes a
Mm.
clinical issue when it interferes with
Yes,
your functioning. So when you're no
exactly.
longer able to live your life, when you're no
Mm,
longer able to fulfill your roles as a
mm,
mother, as a husband, as a
mm,
partner, as a worker, that's when
mm.
it becomes problematic.
Yes. It's a
Shukran so much
peeps
for
not
this.
problematic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Shukran so much for this conversation, Saabierah. I think we definitely need to have you back on the show to talk a little bit more about these conditions. But I wonder if you could leave our listeners with an activity, a wellness activity that they could do
Mm.
in their own space and time.
Okay. Maybe an introduction to grounding exercises. It's something I use quite often in my private practice. It's something we teach to the clients as well. I like to open up with an example of a ballerina doing a pirouette. They're spinning and they're spinning and they're spinning, and the world is turning. And from like a different viewpoint, you'd think like everything was chaotic and crazy. But when a ballerina stops, they stop with grace and they stop almost in control. And how do they do that? They pick one spot on the wall, and it doesn't matter how fast they turn or how many turns, they always come back to the one spot. And that grounding actually keeps them centered. And so, how we can do this in our everyday life, everyday practice, is to actually, for example, activate your five senses, right? So maybe just for easing into such an example, that you just choosing one sense, right?
Yeah, one.
Yeah. For me, for example, I'm very tactile, right? So I like feeling things. So if I'm feeling quite anxious, so I've had quite a like a busy, overwhelming day, and I need to center myself so that the feeling again doesn't grow too big, I will pick one thing to feel. And whether that be a stress ball, whether it be the couch, and I will follow and pay all attention to the one sense. So, what can I feel with my hand? Are there rough edges to the couch? Are there smooth edges? What am I feeling and where am I feeling it on my hand? And the ability to then focus all of our thoughts on one benign, safe stimulus almost tells the brain it's okay to come out of that flight or fight mode, that you're safe now. Um, and in time, the more we do it, the easier it gets. And you can do it in public. No one's going to think anything if you're not feeling your jersey while you're sitting in a meeting. And so I like the grounding exercises because you can do it anywhere at any time, whether you're alone or with people. And you can choose any of your senses, but just choose one and try to focus everything into that one space.
I love
Glass of
that
calm when you were
example.
talking now about it, when you talk,
Yeah.
you were my
No?
eyes sort of feeling like,
Here's the
oh,
steam
calm.
feeling my seam on my top. No, but I think it speaks very closely to. I mean, I think it's something that we even do in our own practice. I mean, we fidget with our bracelets or we
Mm,
hold our rings, and it's
mm,
something that we do, but we don't always pay attention to it and
mm,
move our focus to that. Such a
mm.
nice way of getting out of our own heads.
Yeah.
Yes,
So it's become
yes.
overwhelming,
Mm,
and I know a lot of the schools are also implementing different types of seating now, which is also another way of introducing a sensory
mm,
stimulus to,
mm.
and fidget toys and all of those are
Yeah.
becoming quite popular.
Yeah.
Shukran so much, Sabira. It's been
Fine.
wonderful to have you on. We make dua for health and success and blessings in your practice and in your home life with your family. And we really appreciate your time. We know that you're a busy woman, and busy people are the ones who get things done. So yeah,
True, that is so true.
yeah, man,
I love
busy
that.
busy
I'm going to
people.
take that.
Busy people are always the ones who say yes to more things and more things. So shukran for agreeing to be here. We appreciate you. We appreciate the work that you're doing. And all of this is about building a stronger community. So,
Yeah. And shukran
thank
for this
you.
initiative that you guys are taking. Hey, I think this is quite important work. I think, demystifying the process and letting people know that the support is there, it actually can help us build our community and strengthen it. So, yeah, shukran to you guys. I think this is important work
That's
as well.
that we appreciate that. And I think, I mean, we starting the conversation. That's
Mm,
the idea, is just to start the conversation. And I'm just thinking now, everything that you've shared, it's so valuable because you've made it so simple to understand. And the one thing that sticks out to my mind right now is talking about feelings and our emotions and how they are just feelings. They communicate. They are signals. They don't have to be good or bad. And I think that's part of the issue sometimes, is seeing things in these polarized ways, and then
yes.
and then suddenly
Yes.
it's a bad thing, and so now there's
Mm,
feelings towards it, and it just becomes
mm,
such a bigger problem.
And the guilt comes in.
Yeah,
mm,
Yeah.
but just like, what, they serve a purpose in your life.
mm.
And if you understand it like that, you can have such a different experience. So
Yes.
shukran so much for simplifying, all of these things for us.
Yeah.
Afwan,
Now you
it's been
guys,
a pleasure.
therapy is important. You heard it here first. No?
I'm going to use that one now. I'm going to keep that line. I'm going to use it. Shukran so much, Sabra.
Shukran to you
Assalamu
guys.
alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.